Sometimes the warmest heart is forced to sleep in the coldest place. Hannah Brooks tightened the worn blanket around her shoulders as the heavy wooden gates of Blackwood Keep slowly opened before sunrise. The towering castle stood against the pale morning sky like a kingdom built from ancient stone and quiet promises. She had traveled for nearly 3 days with nothing more than a leather satchel filled with dried herbs, neatly folded healer's cloths, and the hope that serving as an omega within the royal estate would finally allow her to build a meaningful life. She did not arrive seeking comfort or recognition. She simply wanted the chance to help wherever she was needed. The castle courtyard already bustled with servants carrying baskets of vegetables, stable workers leading horses across polished cobblestones, and palace attendants preparing for another busy day. Hannah smiled politely to everyone she passed, but most hurried by without returning the greeting. Eventually, she reached the steward responsible for assigning duties to newly arrived workers. The elderly man carefully examined her letter of recommendation before sighing with quiet regret. "Your qualifications are excellent," he admitted kindly. "Unfortunately, every room inside the servant quarters is already occupied." Hannah nodded with understanding instead of disappointment. "I understand. I can wait until something becomes available." The steward hesitated before pointing toward a cluster of weathered stone buildings standing beyond the main courtyard. "There is one place with enough space for a bedroll. It is not ideal, but it is dry and sheltered." Hannah thanked him sincerely and followed the narrow path leading toward the royal stables. The scent of fresh hay drifted through the cool autumn air as she entered the spacious wooden building. Beautiful horses rested peacefully inside spotless stalls, while experienced caretakers quietly completed their morning routines. At the far end of the stable stood another section separated by sturdy wooden fencing. Curious, Hannah stepped closer and discovered several large wolves resting quietly upon thick beds of straw. Some appeared elderly, others moved slowly with visible exhaustion, and one remained curled quietly beneath a blanket despite the gentle warmth of the stable. A gray-haired stable keeper noticed her concerned expression. "Those are the royal wolves," he explained softly. "Many are growing old. Some have been recovering for quite some time." Hannah slowly knelt beside the nearest enclosure. One silver-coated wolf lifted tired golden eyes toward her before lowering its head once again. She noticed an untouched bowl of water sitting nearby and quietly replaced it with fresh water before asking permission with a respectful glance toward the stable keeper. He smiled faintly and nodded. "They seem comfortable around you already." By evening, the steward returned carrying a neatly folded blanket and a simple pillow. "I am afraid this corner will have to serve as your room for now," he said apologetically, while pointing toward a clean area beside the wolf enclosure. Hannah looked around the peaceful stable, where warm lantern light danced across wooden beams and soft straw covered the floor. Instead of complaining, she spread her blanket neatly beside the quiet animals. Before lying down, she gently checked each water bucket once more, added fresh straw beneath the oldest wolf, and quietly whispered, "You should all sleep comfortably tonight." One by one the wolves lifted their heads, watching her with calm curiosity instead of fear. Outside, the castle slowly disappeared into silence beneath countless stars. Inside the stable, Hannah closed her eyes upon her simple bed while only a few feet away the sick wolves rested more peacefully than they had in many nights, completely unaware that before the next sunrise another silent visitor would arrive and witness everything she had chosen to do when she believed no one was watching. The first light of dawn slipped quietly through the narrow windows of the royal stable as Hannah Brooks slowly opened her eyes to the gentle sound of calm breathing surrounding her. Instead of waking to the noise of crowded servant quarters, she found herself beneath rough wooden beams where soft golden light rested across fresh straw and the peaceful forms of the royal wolves. For a brief moment, she forgot she had spent the night beside them, but the oldest silver-coated wolf quietly lifted its head and greeted her with calm golden eyes that seemed noticeably brighter than the evening before. Hannah smiled warmly before rising from her blanket. She carefully folded her bedding, washed her hands with cool water from a nearby basin, and immediately began checking each enclosure. She quietly replaced empty water buckets, brushed loose straw into clean piles, and gently examined the older wolves with the practiced attention of someone who had spent years caring for living creatures that could not explain their pain with words. The gray-haired stable-keeper arrived carrying fresh feed and stopped in quiet surprise. "You have already finished half of my morning work," he observed with a grateful smile. Hannah looked up modestly. "I woke early. It seemed easier to help before everyone became busy." The old man chuckled softly. "Most people assigned to sleep here spend their first morning asking when they can leave." Hannah glanced toward the resting wolves. "They deserve company. Healing is easier when someone stays nearby." After completing her regular duties inside the castle throughout the day, Hannah returned to the stable before sunset carrying several bundles of medicinal herbs she had gathered with permission from the castle gardens. She carefully prepared a warm herbal mixture and added a few drops to the drinking water recommended by traditional healer practices. She gently brushed the thick fur of the oldest wolf, speaking softly all the while even though she knew the animals could not answer. "You have been strong for a long time," she whispered. "Now, let someone care for you, for a little while." The wolf quietly leaned against her hand before settling comfortably back onto the fresh straw. As darkness slowly covered the castle once again, Hannah finished cleaning every enclosure before quietly eating her simple evening meal beside a lantern hanging from one of the wooden beams. She never noticed a tall figure standing silently outside the stable entrance, partially hidden by the early morning mist that still lingered in the cool autumn air. The stranger remained completely still, watching as Hannah carefully spread an extra blanket across one elderly wolf whose breathing seemed slower than the others. She then moved her own bedroll slightly farther away so the animal would have the warmest corner of the stable. The unknown observer studied every quiet movement without interrupting. There was no hesitation in Hannah's actions, no sign that she expected anyone to praise her, and no audience before whom she could perform kindness. Everything she did came naturally, as though compassion required no effort at all. When she finally settled beneath her own blanket, exhausted after another long day of work, she quietly wished every wolf a peaceful night before closing her eyes. The mysterious visitor remained for several moments longer before turning away without making a sound. As the first rays of another sunrise slowly approached the eastern sky, he carried with him the memory of a young Omega who had willingly traded the comfort of a warm bed for the chance to make forgotten creatures feel a little less alone, and although Hannah believed she had spent another ordinary night unseen by anyone, someone had now begun returning to the stable every single morning simply to witness the quiet kindness she never realized was changing more than the lives of the royal wolves. Several mornings passed, and the quiet routine inside the royal stable gradually became as familiar to Hannah Brooks as the rising sun itself. Long before the castle bells welcomed another day, she would gently rise from her simple blanket, fold it neatly against the wooden wall, and begin caring for the royal wolves before anyone else arrived. She cleaned fresh water buckets, brushed thick coats that had become dull with age, replaced worn straw with clean bedding, and quietly spoke encouraging words while preparing warm herbal infusions recommended by the healing traditions she had learned since childhood. The wolves no longer watched her with uncertainty. Instead, they greeted her with calm eyes and relaxed movements that seemed to reflect complete trust. Even the oldest silver-coated wolf, who had barely lifted his head during her first evening inside the stable, now slowly approached whenever Hannah entered his enclosure, patiently waiting while she examined his breathing and gently brushed the fur around his neck. The gray-haired stable keeper observed the remarkable change with growing amazement. "I have cared for these wolves for many years," he admitted one morning while filling fresh hay for the horses nearby. "They have never accepted anyone this quickly." Hannah smiled modestly as she tied another bundle of herbs beside a water trough. Perhaps they simply needed someone willing to spend time with them. The stable keeper quietly nodded. Perhaps they were waiting for exactly that person. Later that afternoon, Hannah completed her ordinary responsibilities throughout the castle before returning once again with fresh herbs gathered from the palace gardens. She never considered the extra work a burden. To her, every creature deserved comfort whether anyone noticed or not. As evening settled peacefully across Blackwood Keep, She carefully prepared another soothing herbal mixture and softly sang an old village melody while replacing the final bedding inside the largest enclosure. The familiar tune echoed gently beneath the high wooden ceiling, creating a calm atmosphere that seemed to soothe every animal resting nearby. Hidden just beyond the stable entrance, the mysterious visitor paused once again before stepping inside. This time, he did not remain completely concealed. Hannah noticed him standing quietly near one of the wooden support beams. He wore a simple dark traveling coat without any sign of rank or status, making him appear little different from an ordinary castle official. His calm silver eyes rested upon the wolves before meeting hers. "They seem much happier," he observed in a gentle voice. Hannah smiled politely. "They have been very patient with me." The stranger slowly walked closer to the enclosure, where the oldest wolf now rested peacefully. The animal lifted its head toward him before calmly returning its attention to Hannah, a reaction that seemed to surprise the visitor more than he expected. "That one usually trusts very few people," he remarked thoughtfully. Hannah reached down to gently stroke the wolf's thick silver fur. "Trust cannot be hurried," she answered softly. "Sometimes all it needs is someone who keeps coming back." The stranger studied her with quiet curiosity. "And you never grow tired of returning?" Hannah shook her head with a peaceful smile. "Healing rarely happens in a single day. If someone or something needs another morning, then another morning is exactly what they should receive." The visitor remained silent for several moments, as though carefully remembering every word she spoke. Before leaving, he glanced once more toward the resting wolves whose breathing had become noticeably calmer than before. "I hope tomorrow finds them even stronger," he said quietly. Hannah nodded warmly. "I believe it will." As he disappeared into the fading twilight, Hannah assumed she had simply spoken with another castle worker who cared about the royal animals. She never imagined that the quiet stranger would return before every sunrise, not because the wolves needed watching, but because he had become quietly fascinated by the gentle Omega whose kindness seemed capable of healing hearts just as naturally as it healed those who could never ask for help. As the weeks quietly passed, Hannah Brooks became an ordinary sight within the royal stable, though few people inside Blackwood Keep understood why she continued sleeping beside the wolves when more comfortable places occasionally became available. Some servants shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered that the young Omega had become strangely attached to animals instead of seeking a better position inside the castle. Hannah heard the rumors from time to time, but they never changed her routine. Every evening she returned with fresh herbs gathered from the palace gardens, carefully prepared warm drinking water, replaced worn bedding, and patiently sat beside the oldest wolves until they drifted peacefully to sleep. The animals responded with remarkable trust. Those who had once remained withdrawn now eagerly approached whenever she entered the stable. Their coats gradually regained a healthy shine, their movements became steadier, and even the oldest silver-coated wolf began greeting each sunrise standing proudly instead of resting silently upon the straw. The gray-haired stable keeper often watched with quiet amazement. "I have spent years hoping to see them recover like this," he admitted one evening. Hannah simply smiled while gently brushing another wolf's thick fur. "Sometimes healing comes more slowly than we expect." Before dawn the following morning, the familiar visitor returned once again, wearing the same simple dark coat. He paused near the stable entrance, while the wolves immediately noticed his arrival. To his surprise, instead of remaining cautious, several wolves calmly looked toward him before returning their attention to Hannah as she quietly prepared another herbal mixture. "They seem completely different now," the stranger observed. Hannah looked around the stable with gentle satisfaction. They only needed patience, consistency, and someone willing to believe they could still become stronger. The visitor slowly approached the oldest silver wolf. The great animal calmly rested its head beside Hannah without hesitation. "It trusts you more than anyone," he remarked thoughtfully. Hannah laughed softly. "Trust cannot be demanded. It grows a little every day." The stranger smiled, clearly remembering her earlier words about returning every morning. "You always seem to find hope where other people see only difficulty." Hannah carefully folded another clean blanket before answering. "Hope becomes easier to find when someone refuses to stop looking." The quiet conversation ended as the first castle bells echoed across the courtyard, calling servants to begin another busy day. The visitor inclined his head politely before leaving without revealing anything about himself. Hannah watched him disappear beyond the stable doors and quietly wondered why he always appeared before sunrise and never after the castle fully awakened. She assumed he simply enjoyed checking on the wolves before beginning his own work. Later that afternoon, while carrying fresh herbs through the castle corridor, Hannah overheard several servants laughing among themselves. One shook his head with amused disbelief. "The new Omega actually prefers sleeping beside old wolves," another remarked. "Perhaps she believes she belongs there." Hannah continued walking without responding. Their words stung for only a brief moment before she reminded herself why she had chosen to stay. The wolves had become healthier. They greeted each morning with brighter eyes and calmer spirits. That alone made every uncomfortable night worthwhile. Unknown to everyone sharing those careless rumors, the quiet stranger who returned before every sunrise had heard the same whispers many times before, and with each passing day his admiration for the humble Omega only grew stronger because he understood something the rest of the castle had completely failed to see. True loyalty was never revealed by comfortable circumstances, but by the quiet choices someone continued making when they believed no important eyes were watching. One quiet morning began differently from all the others. Hannah Brooks had spent most of the night beside the oldest silver-coated wolf after noticing his breathing had become slower than usual during the evening. She refreshed cool water several times, prepared another gentle herbal mixture, and remained awake long after the stable lanterns had burned low. Only when the wolf finally settled into peaceful sleep did she allow herself to rest, leaning against a thick bundle of clean straw with her folded blanket draped loosely across her shoulders. Dawn arrived slowly, filling the stable with soft golden light that reflected across polished wooden beams and the calm faces of the resting animals. The silver-coated wolf quietly shifted closer until his head rested comfortably beside Hannah, while two younger wolves stretched peacefully nearby. Anyone entering the stable at that moment would have believed they had discovered a family resting together after a long night rather than a young Omega spending another evening far from the comfort of a proper room. The familiar visitor arrived before the first castle bell echoed across Blackwood Keep. He paused silently at the entrance, taking in the peaceful scene before him. For several moments, he simply watched without disturbing the quiet. Hannah remained asleep, exhaustion softening her expression after another night devoted entirely to creatures that could never repay her kindness. The wolves remained perfectly calm, as though protecting the gentle healer who had become part of their daily lives. A faint smile appeared upon the stranger's face before he quietly covered the stable lantern to prevent its fading light from disturbing her rest. He turned to leave without making a sound, but fate interrupted the peaceful morning. Two palace attendants entered the stable while discussing preparations for the upcoming royal council gathering. They stopped immediately upon seeing Hannah asleep beside the wolves. One looked genuinely shocked while the other frowned with open disapproval. "There she is," one whispered. "The Omega everyone has been talking about." The second attendant shook his head. "Sleeping here again. This cannot continue." Their voices stirred Hannah awake. She immediately stood, embarrassed to have been discovered resting against the straw instead of already beginning her morning work. Before she could explain, the attendants informed her that she had been ordered to appear in the Great Hall after the morning meal because several senior officials wished to discuss her unusual living arrangements. Hannah quietly nodded without argument. After they departed, she looked toward the stable entrance, hoping to ask the familiar visitor for advice, but he had already disappeared into the morning mist. Throughout the day, whispers spread rapidly across the castle corridors. Some servants insisted the young Omega had forgotten proper boundaries. Others claimed she cared more for wolves than people. Hannah continued performing every assigned duty with the same calm dedication as always, refusing to answer rumors with resentment. That evening she returned to the stable carrying fresh herbs exactly as she had every night before. The wolves welcomed her without hesitation, surrounding her with quiet trust that no criticism could diminish. She gently stroked the oldest silver-coated wolf before whispering with a tired smile, "Tomorrow will be another day." She believed the following morning would simply bring more questions from unfamiliar officials. She never imagined that when the doors of the Great Hall finally opened, the quiet stranger she had greeted before every sunrise would no longer be standing in simple traveling clothes beside the stable, but seated upon the highest throne in the kingdom where a single truth would change every moment of her life forever. The walk to the Great Hall felt much longer than it had the day Hannah Brooks first entered Blackwood Keep. Every polished stone corridor seemed quieter than usual, and every servant she passed offered curious glances before quickly looking away. She held her hands calmly together despite the uncertainty growing inside her. She had replayed the previous morning repeatedly in her mind, wondering whether sleeping beside the wolves had truly offended someone so deeply that she would lose the opportunity she had worked so hard to earn. Even then, she did not regret a single night spent inside the stable. The elderly wolves had become healthier, their coats had regained their shine, and the oldest silver-coated companion now walked with steady confidence instead of quiet exhaustion. Those small victories were worth every uncomfortable evening. Massive oak doors slowly opened before her, revealing the magnificent great hall filled with towering marble columns, brilliant stained glass windows, polished floors reflecting streams of colorful morning light, and rows of royal advisors standing silently along both sides of the chamber. Hannah lowered her eyes respectfully as she stepped forward, believing she would simply answer questions before returning to her duties. Then she looked toward the royal throne. Her footsteps stopped instantly. The quiet stranger she had greeted before every sunrise stood at the center of the hall wearing elegant black royal clothing embroidered with silver thread instead of the simple traveling coat she had always known. Moments later he ascended the short marble steps and calmly took his place upon the throne. A royal herald announced in a clear voice, His Majesty, Alpha King Nathaniel Ashford. Hannah felt her breath catch in complete astonishment. Every conversation inside the stable, every gentle question, every peaceful sunrise suddenly returned to her with entirely new meaning. She immediately lowered her head in respectful surprise, embarrassed that she had unknowingly spoken so casually with the ruler of the kingdom. Silence filled the hall until Nathaniel rose once more and ascended from the throne instead of remaining above everyone else. His measured footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor before he stopped only a few feet from Hannah. His expression remained calm and reassuring, the same quiet kindness she had always seen before sunrise. "There is no reason to be afraid," he said gently. Hannah struggled to find the right words. "Your Majesty, I did not know." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "That is exactly why I continued returning every morning." The assembled court watched in complete silence as the Alpha King turned to face them. "For many weeks I observed this young Omega before the sun rose over Blackwood Keep. She believed no one important could see her actions, yet every morning she chose compassion over comfort. She gave the warmest corner of the stable to aging wolves. She shared her time without expectation. She healed those who had been quietly forgotten." Hannah slowly lifted her eyes, unable to believe the king had witnessed every small act she considered ordinary. Nathaniel continued, speaking with quiet conviction. "Character is revealed when no audience exists. Loyalty is proven when recognition is absent. This healer has demonstrated both more clearly than many who serve inside these walls." The whispers that had once followed Hannah disappeared into respectful silence as every person inside the great hall realized the humble Omega standing before them had earned the admiration of the Alpha King not through titles or ambition, but through countless unseen mornings devoted entirely to kindness. And although Hannah's life had already changed forever, Nathaniel had not yet revealed the decision that would soon transform both the future of the royal wolves and the place she would hold. Within the kingdom itself, silence lingered throughout the great hall long. After the Alpha King finished speaking, no one seemed willing to interrupt the weight of his words. Hannah Brooks remained standing quietly, still trying to understand how the stranger she had greeted before every sunrise had witnessed every ordinary moment she believed belonged only to herself and the aging wolves. Nathaniel Ashford slowly turned toward the gathered advisors and court officials, his calm expression never wavering. Many of you questioned why an Omega would choose to sleep inside the royal stable, he said evenly. I ask myself a different question every morning. Why would someone willingly give up comfort for creatures who could offer nothing in return? His gaze moved across the hall before returning to Hannah. The answer never changed. Because genuine compassion expects no reward. Several officials lowered their eyes in thoughtful silence. Others remembered the careless rumors they had repeated only days before. Nathaniel continued, I watched her replace water before she drank her own. I watched her surrender the warmest blanket to an elderly wolf during the coldest night of the season. I watched her finish every assigned duty inside this castle before returning to the stable without complaint. None of those choices were made to impress anyone. She believed no one important was watching. Hannah felt emotion quietly rise within her, not because she had finally been recognized, but because someone had truly understood the reasons behind every simple decision she had made. Nathaniel stepped closer with the same quiet kindness she remembered from countless peaceful mornings. Hannah Brooks, he said gently, the royal wolves no longer survive because someone ordered them to be cared for. They thrive because someone chose to love them when it was inconvenient. He paused briefly before making the announcement that transformed the atmosphere throughout the chamber. Beginning today, you will become the official keeper of the royal wolves. You will oversee their care, advise the royal healers responsible for animal recovery, and receive permanent residence within Blackwood Keep. A quiet wave of surprise spread through the assembled court. Hannah could scarcely believe what she had heard. Your Majesty, she answered softly, I never hoped for recognition. I only wanted them to feel safe. Nathaniel smiled warmly. That is exactly why this responsibility belongs to you. The gray-haired stable keeper standing near the rear of the hall could not hide his proud smile. He had watched Hannah transform frightened, weary animals through nothing more than patience, consistency, and kindness. Now the entire kingdom finally understood what he had witnessed from the beginning. Later that afternoon, Hannah returned to the stable carrying the same leather satchel and bundle of fresh herbs she had carried every day before. Nothing about her routine changed. She still refreshed every water bucket herself, brushed every weathered coat with gentle care, and quietly greeted each wolf by the unique habits she had come to recognize. The only difference was that the stable doors now stood open. Sunlight filled every corner, and several young caretakers respectfully gathered nearby, eager to learn from the woman whose compassion had earned the trust of both the royal wolves and the Alpha King. As the oldest silver-coated wolf calmly rested his head against Hannah's shoulder once again, Nathaniel quietly observed from the stable entrance with a peaceful smile, knowing that the greatest decision he had made as ruler was not placing a crown upon someone's head, but placing responsibility into the hands of the one person who had already proven every single morning that true leadership always begins with quiet service. The changes inside the royal stable did not happen overnight, but every passing week quietly reflected the difference that one compassionate heart could make. Under Hannah Brooks's careful guidance, the weathered building that had once been overlooked by nearly everyone inside Blackwood Keep gradually became one of the warmest places in the entire kingdom. New windows allowed fresh morning light to reach every enclosure, clean wooden stalls replaced worn partitions, fresh straw arrived each day without delay, and shelves filled with carefully labeled medicinal herbs stood neatly beside polished water basins. None of the improvements felt extravagant. Every change served one simple purpose, allowing every royal wolf to recover with dignity and comfort. Hannah refused to treat the responsibility as a position of honor. Instead, she approached each sunrise exactly as she always had. She arrived before the first castle bell, greeted every wolf with the same gentle voice, checked fresh water, prepared herbal remedies, examined older animals with patient attention, and quietly thanked the young caretakers who had volunteered to assist her. They quickly discovered that her greatest lesson had very little to do with medicine. Healing begins long before treatment. She often reminded them with a calm smile. Every living creature should first feel safe. The apprentices listened carefully while watching the remarkable trust the wolves continued placing in her. Even animals once known for avoiding strangers calmly approached whenever Hannah entered the stable, responding to her familiar voice with peaceful confidence. News of the remarkable transformation spread beyond the castle walls. Experienced healers from neighboring villages traveled to Blackwood, keep hoping to observe the methods responsible for restoring the aging royal wolves. Many expected to discover rare medicines or complicated techniques. Instead, they found a humble Omega patiently brushing old fur, replacing fresh water before every meal, speaking gently to frightened animals, and teaching that consistency often accomplished what hurried effort never could. Nathaniel Ashford occasionally visited before sunrise just as he had done from the beginning. Although everyone now recognized him as the Alpha King, he quietly stood near the stable entrance, without interrupting Hannah's work. Watching the peaceful rhythm of the morning reminded him why he had trusted her long before anyone else understood her value. One morning he noticed a young apprentice carefully covering an elderly wolf with a warm blanket before beginning any other task. Hannah smiled proudly. "You remembered the first lesson." The apprentice nodded. Comfort before treatment. Nathaniel quietly realized those simple words reflected something much larger than caring for animals. They described the kind of kingdom he wanted to lead. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, the stable remained filled with warmth instead of loneliness. The oldest silver-coated wolf, once too weak to stand for long, now greeted each morning by walking confidently beside Hannah through the spacious courtyard while younger wolves followed close behind. Castle servants who had once whispered dismissively now paused to admire the remarkable sight with genuine respect. No one spoke about the Omega who had slept inside the stable because she had nowhere else to go. They spoke instead about the keeper of the royal wolves whose compassion had quietly transformed forgotten lives without ever asking for recognition. As another sunrise filled Blackwood Keep with soft golden light, Nathaniel watched Hannah laughing gently beside the healthy wolves and understood that the strongest foundation of any kingdom was never built through power alone, but through ordinary acts of kindness repeated faithfully every single day until they quietly changed the world around them. Many months passed, yet one tradition inside Blackwood Keep never changed. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the castle towers, Hannah Brooks could always be found walking quietly through the royal stable with a woven basket of fresh herbs resting upon her arm. She still greeted every wolf by name, paused beside each enclosure with the same patient smile, and carefully checked fresh water before beginning any other task. The responsibilities surrounding her had grown far greater than she had ever imagined, but success had never altered the simple habits that first earned the trust of the royal wolves. The younger caretakers now carried many daily duties themselves, yet Hannah remained the first to arrive every morning because she believed leadership should always begin with example rather than instruction. The stable itself had become a place of quiet hope. Travelers from distant regions often visited to learn how the royal wolves had recovered so remarkably, and many left speaking less about herbal medicine than about the kindness they had witnessed. Between every caretaker and every animal, the oldest silver-coated wolf, once too weak to rise without assistance, now walked proudly through the courtyard each sunrise with calm dignity, always choosing to remain close beside Hannah as though remembering every gentle night she had spent protecting him from loneliness. Nathaniel Ashford continued honoring another tradition that no royal schedule could replace. Whenever his responsibilities allowed, he arrived before dawn wearing a simple traveling coat instead of ceremonial robes, just as he had done during those first quiet mornings when Hannah never knew the identity of the stranger watching from the stable entrance. She always noticed him immediately now, welcoming him with the same warm smile that had never changed despite everything that had happened. Together they often walked slowly among the peaceful wolves while the castle remained wrapped in the silence before another busy day. One crisp spring morning Nathaniel paused near the doorway where Hannah had once spread her blanket upon the straw. "Do you ever miss anything about those first nights?" he asked gently. Hannah looked around the bright stable filled with healthy wolves, grateful apprentices, fresh flowers, and warm morning light before answering with quiet honesty. "I do not miss sleeping on the straw," she admitted with a soft laugh. "But I never want to forget why I stayed." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "Neither do I." His eyes rested upon the place where he had first watched her choosing compassion without expecting recognition. Those mornings reminded me that a kingdom becomes stronger when good people quietly do the right thing, even when they believe no one important will ever notice. Hannah smiled as the oldest silver-coated wolf calmly rested against her shoulder. Perhaps kindness is never truly unseen, she replied. Sometimes it simply takes time before the right person recognizes it. The first castle bell echoed gently across Blackwood Keep as another sunrise painted the sky with soft gold and pale blue. Young caretakers began welcoming the day with the same quiet patience Hannah had taught them, while healthy wolves stretched comfortably beneath the growing light. Nathaniel looked across the peaceful stable and realized that the greatest legacy left within those walls would never be remembered as a royal decree or a magnificent victory. It would be remembered as the quiet example of one humble Omega who chose to sleep beside forgotten wolves because she believed every life deserved compassion. And from that simple decision, an entire kingdom learned that true strength is measured not by power, but by the kindness someone continues giving long after the world stops watching.